Okay, hello everyone. Thank you once again for joining another week of the Domestic Violence Connection Circles. I am absolutely thrilled to have all of you here, and I'm even more thrilled to have my guest here today. And as you know, just a little bit of recap, this session and this weekly information group is really to share information for victims and survivors about domestic violence. We have been seeing and reading and sharing reports of how domestic violence is rising during the pandemic because of greater financial control that abusers have, because of the isolation being handed to abusers on a silver platter inadvertently, but that becomes the biggest tool that abusers have at their disposal to control their victims, because of lack of awareness, because of resources that are tapped out, like shelters being full and other resources that are at capacity or over capacity, and just lack of knowledge. And I'm a firm believer in the fact that knowledge is power. So this session is about creating a safe space to be able to have these conversations, share knowledge and resources, and give hope to victims and survivors that there is a better way and there are options. And pandemic or no pandemic, abuse should never be tolerated, and it is never acceptable. And we have done sessions on emotional and psychological abuse. I have had a couple of family lawyers come in and share their wisdom on knowledge about family law and how it is affected by domestic violence and how judges take into account any kind of abuse in the family. And I've had last session was on safety planning. And today I am super thrilled to have Mike Cameron join us. And how I got to know Mike was through this really powerful CBC article that I read last week. And I cannot even tell you how overjoyed and just touched. I had goosebumps as I was reading that article. I was just so inspired and touched by that piece you'd written, Mike, about why it is important for men to take the initiative and have these conversations and change and speak up and make a difference. Because gender-based violence is not a gender issue. It is not a men versus women issue. It affects all of us. It affects our children. It affects our societies, our communities. Every year, it costs Canada $7.4 billion to deal with the aftermath of domestic violence alone. 1 in 3 women in Canada are affected by intimate partner violence. And while abuse and domestic abuse affects men too, women by far are the majority of victims. And we will talk about that a little bit as well. But it is important for men to take that up. And there are far more good men out there than there are abusers. And we need these men to be more vocal, to come out and say, you know what, it's not okay for us just to stay quiet, because I'm not doing any of that. But it's important to take that initiative that, go from not all men to no men are okay with abuse. And I know Mike and I talked about that a little bit. I will go into that, but I'm just so thrilled to have you here, Mike. I reached out to him right after I read that article. I'm like, I gotta find this person. And I found him on LinkedIn, and I invited him here. And to my absolute joy, he said yes. We had a great conversation last week, and this is the result of that. So thank you so much for being here, Mike. You have no idea how thrilled I am. And I'd let you say more about the work you do, because there's so much to it and I won't be able to do justice. But if you can just give us some insight into all the work that you do to create a more gender equal world for all of us.
Yeah, so I mean, again, my focus has been on working with the men side of the conversation, and it's interesting because I sort of resisted the gendered nature of the conversation for a very long time. And how do we just be good human beings? But the realities are, I mean, there are some unique pressures, societal pressures on men that create some unique problems that require some unique solutions. So I started diving into that fairly heavily, and in 2017, Michelle and I co-founded the Ignore No More Run for Respect. And the idea behind that was really to get men involved in the conversation. So, when it comes to engaging men and boys, there's all kinds of research that talks about meeting men where they're at. whether that's the sports field or, you know, the clubhouse or the pub or wherever that happens to be. And for me, running is one of my things. I'm an ultra marathoner and pretty well connected in the run community. So it just made a lot of sense for me to start there. And so, yeah, Michelle and I started the Ignore No More Run for Respect. This year will be our 4th year. Obviously, this year is a little bit different because
I was
we're
going to
not doing the
ask, maybe we'll be
mass
running on
gathering.
our treadmills in our homes or something.
Well, it'll be interesting. So our run is typically the last weekend of September. So we haven't officially canceled yet. So we're going to wait and see. I'm not certain. I mean, Alberta has said that no mass gatherings for the entire summer, but I don't know what exactly that means. And we've also just partnered with the Jessica Martel Memorial Foundation to host an Ignore No More run, virtual run this summer. So actually that'll be announced tomorrow.
That's great. That's wonderful. And tell us a little bit more about your book as well, and the support group for men that you do. I'd love to hear. I'm sure.
Yeah. So the book, Becoming a Better Man When Something's Got to Change, Maybe It's You, has really been an evolution. It's really interesting sort of how it's come together. It originally started probably 5 years ago as a business book. I started something to the effect of actionable, 30 days to a better you, actionable insights for the entrepreneur. And it was really focused on the business side of the equation. And over the years, it kind of evolved. And, when we get to my story, that'll make a lot more sense. But it's really just about, I've had 3 sort of pinnacle, fairly traumatic experiences in my life. So I've documented those and some of the lessons that I've learned moving through that I think can be very helpful for other men. Actually, it was really cool. I got a message today from a man that had read my book, and at the end of each chapter, I have it's almost a workbook. So I have like just 1 page of questions at the end, just sort of self-reflective type questions. And he sent me a photograph of his bedroom mirror, and he had one of my questions up there.
Oh, wow.
That he had written on his mirror. So he asked himself that question every morning. It was fantastic to see.
That's incredible.
Yeah, so it's pretty cool.
That's amazing. And so let's get into how you started this. Can you share that story with us? Like, what made you start this work? What made you start that, Ignore No More run, or the support group that you do for men, and all your work, really?
Yeah. So the reason that I ended up getting involved in this work and the impetus for that article, Dear Men, sort of calling on the good men to step up, was the realization that, I think there are more good men than there are bad. And B, if we want to impact change, we need to step up. So on October 1st of 2015, when I went to sleep, I was a good man. I feel like I've been a pretty good man my entire life. Never been a part of the problem. I've never been abusive. October 2nd, when I woke up, I was still a good man. That morning, October 2nd of 2015, my girlfriend was murdered by an ex-boyfriend who subsequently took his own life. And, these atrocities carry on while all of us good men sit back and continue to be not part of the problem. And I realized at that point that I had a choice to make. I could carry on and continue not being part of the problem, or I could make the choice to actively become part of the solution. And I chose the latter. For me, that was, part of it was a grieving, healing thing. And part of it is I don't like to sit still. When there's something that needs to be done, I'm going to do it. And as you are very well aware, this is something that needs to be done.
Absolutely.
So that's where it came. And yeah, like I said, for me, the book really, it evolved over time. And then of course, when that happened, it just solidified the direction that I had to go with the book. And like I said, it shifted from a business book to a much more sort of general, you know, the tagline, when something's got to change, maybe it's you, came as a result of, after she was killed, I had many well-meaning friends, you know, surround me, give me lots of love, pat me on the back, and they'd all shake their head and they'd say, something's got to change, Mike, something's got to change. And that became my mantra. You know, I'd get up every morning, I'd brush my teeth, I'd look in the mirror and I'd shake my head and I'd say, something's got to change, something's got to change. And then one day when I was looking in that mirror and I said, something's got to change, I added 3 words that shifted everything for me. Something's got to change. Maybe it's you, dude. Maybe it's you. And that's when I decided that it was time to sort of take up that mantle. And in 2017, I met Michelle. And Michelle and I have been dating for almost 3 years now. And together we created, and she's got her own story. But together we created the Ignore No More Run for Respect. And that was where that was born. Again, the intent is to connect with men. And, you know, this isn't about shame and blame. This is about getting to the root cause of the problem. You know, again, when this first happened, I had lots of people that know me and know I'm a champion and I'm going to go out and do something, wanted me to go after the justice system. You know, how do we build a better restraining order? Because she'd done all the right things. She had the right paperwork. She'd filed the right reports, done all the right things. And of course, as we know, that's not a solution. So when I looked at how do we build a better restraining order, to me was really akin to putting a Band-Aid on a ruptured jugular. And I thought, how do we get to the root cause of this problem? How do we prevent men like this from existing in the first place? And in 2018, 2019, I founded an organization called Connected Men that really allows men, creates safe spaces for men to practice, literally practice feeling. We practice emotions. I mean, I think it's widely accepted that, and especially for dudes, if we want to get big and strong, we go to the gym a couple of times a week. Yet, what do we do for our emotional fitness? And the answer to that is absolutely nothing. So when I looked at, and again, going sort of stepping back in my business career, I've been a sales guy and business leader for 20 some odd years. And I recognized early in my career that my customers bought on emotion justified by logic. And, you know, being the guy that I was, I started doing a lot of research in that. And how do I make a more emotional connection with my customer in order to help that customer experience along the way? And what I realized as I dove into the science is it's more than we just make buying decisions based on emotion. As human beings, we make decisions based on emotion. And, you know, when I looked at that, the man that killed her made it a very permanent decision based on a very temporary emotion. And so again, to me, the answer was, how do we create a culture? How do we create a society? How do we create an environment where it's okay for men to explore these emotions, these feelings that come out without waiting until they boil so strong that they come out, they lash out in anger and violence? Yeah. You know, sadly, that's seems to be the only acceptable emotion for men is anger, violence, rage. And we need to change that. Yeah. So that's where my crusade began.
That is so inspiring and heartbreaking, to be honest. It's how it started is absolutely heartbreaking and heart-wrenching. What you've done with it is honestly just so inspiring, and it resonates deeply personally with me because I'm a domestic abuse survivor, and there were a few times when my ex-husband was close to killing me. And today that I'm here, you know, as I look back and I think, yes, I didn't choose what happened to me, but I can choose what to do with it going forward. So thank you. Yeah. Thank you for doing what you're doing and on behalf of me and other victims and survivors and all women out there, I think it's just so needed. Um, One thing I did want to ask you though, you shared a story about this man writing to you and he had put a question from your book on his wall. What was that question?
It was about getting to intention. So I'd have to go back and look, because it was sort of a series. It was about being intentional.
Mm-hmm.
Hang on, I'll find it here. If I can. It was more a series of mantras. So I allow myself to, I will allow,
Okay.
I will become.
Yeah. Affirmations more so. Yeah.
Yeah, that type of thing. So that was, again, one of the chapters I talked about being intentional in your life versus floating, coasting, and washing through. So
Yeah. So let's get from here into a little bit more about the pandemic. So what comes up for you when you're hearing that how domestic violence is rising right now during COVID, and then we hear about the Nova Scotia shootings, and there was a domestic abuser who did that, and this whole thing about isolation. Isolation is the biggest tool that abusers use to control their victims, and when victims are isolated with their abusers, and these are men who are feeling that rage, violence, and anger, as you just described. And now even more so, because you add on financial crisis, you add on uncertainty of what the future is going to look like. Maybe they've lost their job, maybe they are in a situation where they're just feeling frustrated. Otherwise, abuse always escalates during those situations. Even in my marriage, when he lost his job, when he was having health problems and back problems and things, I became the punching bag, and abuse escalated not just in frequency, but also in intensity. So when you hear that, when you hear all these news reports that are coming out with how domestic violence and intimate partner violence is rising so much during this pandemic all over the world, what are your thoughts on
that? Yeah, I mean, again, for me, I look at sort of that root cause, and even before the pandemic, isolation, you touched on it. It's kind of two-sided. One, it's a tool that abusers use, but two, that isolation, loneliness, lack of connection, human connection, I think is part of what triggers that anger and violence and rage in the first place. So, it's part of the problem, and then it's also becomes a tool that gets used. So for me, I just look at, again, in my work, how I can create opportunities for connection, and in particular with men. So, we've now moved our connected men's groups online. So we run those regularly, and we've consolidated our groups. So we run those. And again, it's not about, it's not sort of an abuser support group. It's just regular dudes getting together and, like I said, allowing them an opportunity to practice that emotional hygiene. I mean, you wouldn't go to the house probably without brushing your teeth or slapping some deodorant on. We do all these regular hygiene items, yet we do nothing for our emotional hygiene.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So for
So what
me,
are
it's,
your thoughts on how can men like you and the men that are in your groups and they're really deliberate about learning that emotional hygiene, practicing it, and you're handling the root cause, how do you propose being more vocal about it? Like I hear so much from men on my posts and things that you're not addressing the like a lot of women instigate the abuse, a lot of women provoke us, a lot of women make us angry. That's why we do these things. So what are your thoughts on that?
okay. So there's a couple of things there, because I get it too. So I get I don't get the they provoked me conversation, because I feel like there wouldn't be a dude on the planet that would dare trying to have that friggin' conversation with me. Because
I do want to pick your brain on that a little bit, but I want to let you finish your thoughts first.
that wouldn't stand. But the whole men get abused too conversation, I get it. I understand that that's a problem as well, but it drives me nuts, because especially when they come into my space and want to have that conversation. So I had somebody the other day that I called him out, and to his credit, he backed off, he apologized, and I think he saw some of the error of his ways. But, you know, that's like,
What did he say? Can you
to,
share with us?
sorry?
What did he say? Can you share with us?
Again, it was just the, yeah, but what about men? Men get it too kind of conversation. He actually went back and deleted the comment. So, because I had replied, and I basically said to him, so let me give you the analogy that I use all the time. I mean, it's like going to a cancer fundraiser with hundreds of people in the room, running up on stage, knocking the MC out of the way, grabbing the microphone and saying, yeah, but what about diabetes? Okay, host your own fundraiser. I get it that there's many problems that need addressing in this world, but right now this is the one we're addressing. So please don't deflect from this conversation, because there's another conversation to be had. Again, I'm not going to argue.
But what about this? But what about that? Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
I
and
hear
it's
that all
just,
the time
it's
too.
distraction and deflection. You know, and of course I get it a lot with respect. Oh, sorry, I just lost my train of thought.
I'm sure you get it. I mean, given the fact that you're a man yourself, and there's other men who feel like, why is he so vocal about violence against women?
Yes.
And do you get backlash? Like, do you get the men saying, "Oh, you're raining on our parade," or "You're just blaming men"? And the other day, somebody left a message on my LinkedIn that you talk about violence against women and you paint men as the targets, and uh, it was almost as if it's like men are the victims of this, and
Right.
you know, and uh, men get abused too. Or if not that, then what about this? What about that? So it's I'm sure you get a lot of that too, right?
I do. I don't know that I get as much as some, because I'm pretty mindful of that in my messaging, and I don't leave a lot of opportunity for that, because I really do try not to play the shame and blame game. I mean, the reality is men everywhere are hurting. You look at statistics from a violence standpoint. I mean, that's anger. Anger comes from somewhere. It's not, you know, there's hurt, there's sadness, there's something that's coming up that causes that. Again, I don't want to excuse any of that, because there is zero excuse for it, but there is a reason for it. And the more we can start to understand that reason, I think the better we can start to address the reason.
So on
So
that note, when we talk about, you hear this term toxic masculinity, which comes up so much in the media, in TED Talks, and I was just watching a TED Talk by Justin Baldoni about, you know, men, can you be confident enough? And it was all about men being confident enough to raise their voices, to stand by women, and also to be secure enough in themselves. And I'll just give a personal example. Just a few months ago, I had someone tell me that I'm too successful and I make them feel not like a man. You know, so what does that man and manhood mean? And what are your thoughts on this term of toxic masculinity? And where does this idea of, you know, I don't feel like a man because a woman is stronger than me, so I need to punch her down, or the only way I'll feel powerful is by controlling this woman because it makes me feel better. It obviously comes from a place of insecurity, but there's something deeper there. Can you share that, some of that with
yeah,
us?
well, a lot of that is what I would call, and I'm actually working on a piece for this right now, is what I would call fragile masculinity. You know, when the Gillette ad came out, and we've got Gillette challenging the "aren't we better than this?" And we had so much uproar. It's
Yeah.
like, are you freaking kidding me? All they're suggesting is, let's be good dudes.
Thank you
How
for saying that.
how can you possibly get offended by somebody saying, let's be good dudes? Hey, everybody, let's be good dudes. Wait a minute, I'm offended. So to me, that's what I would call fragile masculinity. And that means that I don't have the confidence to look in the mirror and say, hey, maybe some of these stereotypes that I've been adhering to, maybe some of these tropes are actually hurting me. Maybe they are. So, like, if you don't want to do it for the greater good of the world, do it selfishly. do it for yourself, because I can guarantee you, you will feel much better when you can actually sit down and have a look at and reflect on maybe some of these things that traditionally we've encouraged as a patriarchy, that we've taught men the way they're supposed to be. Maybe some of these things are actually hurting you. And maybe we should have a look at them, and maybe we should consider changing the way we look at these things. So if you're too scared, you can tell me how much I'm allowed to swear on here or not, because I swear a lot. But if
So
you're
do I.
too friggin' scared to look in the mirror and have that conversation, and all you can do is saying, but no, what about, and, you know, stop. Like, it drives me absolutely batty.
Yeah.
And, you know, talking about that, you make me feel like less of a man because you're so successful. That's a legitimate feeling. That's a legitimate emotion. Because I can tell you, as dudes, we've been conditioned that I'm supposed to be the provider. I'm supposed to be the one that takes care of you, Samra. So when you don't need me to, absolutely, I understand that can be threatening. But have the courage to have the conversation and say, I'm not quite sure how to deal with this. This is what's coming up for me. Let's work through this. Let's examine this. Let's explore this. Where's this coming from? I don't get it, because it makes no sense. Intellectually, it makes no sense. I love you. I applaud you. I want you to do well. I want you to be successful. But it's still coming up for me. And it might. It might. Because, again, these things have been very, very deeply ingrained in me, in us as men. It's interesting because when I first started having these conversations, I remember mom reaching out to me and saying, yeah, but we never raised you like that. I think she was a little offended that I was having this conversation because we never raised you like that. And she's right, she didn't. And I said, no, Mom, I get it. I understand you did not raise me like that, but you're only raising me this much. Then we've got, you know, marketing companies with billions of dollars of advertising that are bombarding me with images that telling me that I'm not enough because I need to have that Axe deodorant so I can be man enough, and I need to have X and Y and Z so that I can be man enough. So it's not necessarily about how your parents raised you. These pressures are huge. Again, I can tell you how ridiculous they are, and you know it. And again, intellectually, we know it, but they still come up. They still come up.
The upbringing part is a big component of it too. I think certainly, and again, I use my experience as a bit of a proxy here, but in my case, my ex-husband, in his entire family, abuse was absolutely so normalized, and the good women are supposed to tolerate, and men are allowed to do all of this. This is how it is. This is just how it is. And I was the problem because I had a problem with it. So, yes. You know, culture, upbringing, messaging around you, all of that does play a role. So here we are, like, where, of course, this is generational conditioning that a man is feeling. The natural emotions are coming up, and then you get validation from your family, and you get validation from other people, from social media, from friends, and you've been raised to believe that a woman is nothing more than a prop that offers you extension and gives you all this good stuff in your life, but she doesn't have any identity of her own, and your job as a man is to control her. So it just creates this big, huge, almost like a pressure cooker, I can imagine. You know, with my ex-husband, for example, he always wanted to win the approval of his parents. And he thought that by controlling me and treating me badly in front of them, he would look better as a son, that he's not favoring his wife over them. And I hear these similar kind of situations everywhere, that, oh, because, you know, his mom still favors him, or this is just normalized in his family. And especially in certain cultures and communities, it is. So that I'm saying that upbringing and all of that messaging around you does play a role, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely it does. There's no question. I guess for me, it was interesting because you would look at sort of my upbringing and think I had sort of the picture perfect upbringing. Why would I still feel that way? And yet I do. So let alone if you're brought up in an environment where this kind of thing is encouraged, which it absolutely is, which is speaks to all the more need for the good guys to speak up and have this conversation out loud so that we don't just leave it to women like you to have the conversation alone. Like it's mind-boggling. So, you know, for me, and that's kind of the approach that I try and take is, guys, even if you won't do this for the greater good of humanity, let's look at this selfishly and understand that maybe there's some things that are actually causing you harm, which in turn cause others harm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So,
yeah. And, you know, abuse and domestic abuse, there's always a spectrum. So as much as we would like to believe that these are sociopaths and psychopaths that are doing this kind of stuff because they're going around killing people, in reality, these are flawed human beings with flawed value systems that have been validated by generations of conditioning and people around them. When I wrote my book, I had some goals out of my book. And one of the big goals that I had was that I wanted it to be honest, and I wanted there to be as much empathy as possible. And something that I've heard over and over again from readers across the country is that we were just so confused about how we felt about him. On one hand, you know, he's this monster who's trying to harm you and control you, and towards the end of the marriage, even kill you. But on the other hand, there are all these good moments. There are all these genuine moments of warmth and affection. And on one hand, we hated him. And on the other hand, we felt sorry for him, as if he himself was a victim in his own way. And that was just so validating for me, because that's exactly what I wanted the book to come across as, because that's how the victim feels. You know, like I used to think, oh, wow, he's amazing. He's just being so nice to me. And then it would instill hope, and it would instill this like, yes, it's going to all be great now. You know, this man loves me and I love him. And then the tension starts building up, and then something happens, and then the abuse is there. And after that abusive episode, it's great again. So there's so much confusion, and that confusion causes, you know, when people ask, why do women stay? And that's a big part of it. So can you speak to how abusers often use that guilt, shame, blame, and all of that to entrap or create that cycle of violence? So many women reach out to me asking things like, but you know, but he's also so great, so maybe I should put up with it, or maybe it is my fault. And we touched upon it a little bit a few minutes ago around how, oh, she, or even men, like she's the one who made him angry. Like my ex-husband used to say this, you made me angry, you did this, you did that. And as a victim, you often start believing that maybe it is my fault. What message do you have for women here who are watching and who are in this group that?
Yeah, well, I feel like that's pretty universal. That you are taught, told, conditioned that it's your fault, and that's just not the case. And you touched on something I want to just come back to and highlight, is that violence doesn't start with violence; it starts with those beliefs and attitudes, and that's where we need to start to change it. But yeah, to your point, absolutely, they will. I mean, that's a common theme I see, is that lack of responsibility. So, you know, which is part of the subtitle of my book. When something's got to change, maybe it's you. Maybe you need to take responsibility. Speaking to the guys, like, rather than this, you know, and I had some online conversations recently about the family court system not treating men equally, and you know, again, just the anger that gets spewed up there, and it's just this, you as the dude need to take responsibility for your actions, for your feelings. That is not anybody else's fault, other than my own. right? So putting that blame and shame on your partner, it is absolutely just a manipulation tactic. It's a control tactic. It's a deflection tactic. It's part of the insecurity. And I think it's important to understand that, yeah, it's not you. It's not you. There is never a moment where you can make anybody be violent. That is a choice. We all have choices. You know, I feel a certain way, you know, if you dump hot coffee on my lap, I'm going to feel angry. I have a choice what to do with that. It's a choice. I have a choice. It's not your fault how I feel. It's my, I don't know if fault is the right word, but how I feel is how I feel. I have a choice what I do with that. And that's 100% on me, 100%. So yeah, don't ever let anybody tell you that their behavior is your fault. Their behavior is their choice. Period. End of story. That's it.
Thank you. Oh my gosh, I just got goosebumps as you said that. It is the most consistent thing that I hear from not just with my story, but the thousands of women that I've worked with and spoken with over the last 7 years of doing this advocacy work is that maybe it was my fault. I'm the one who did this. I'm the one who made him angry. And I hear that especially when it comes to emotional and psychological abuse. Because, you know, with physical abuse, it's very, the scars are visible, right? If someone
Yes.
slaps you, it's pretty apparent that, okay, this is violence, right? But with emotional and psychological violence, it's so confusing. It's so wrapped in love and romance oftentimes, and it's hard to detect, especially early on. And I often describe abuse as this frog analogy. If you put the frog in hot water, the frog will jump out and run away. That's kind of like if someone comes and slaps you and you'll be like, you know, whatever, and you'll probably report them or something, and you'll get away from that person. But if you put that frog in cold water and turn the heat up very slightly, the frog's body will keep adjusting to the rising temperature of the water, and then the frog will eventually cook to death without even realizing it. And
Yeah,
that's
no,
how
I think,
abuse escalates. It's insidious. So in the beginning, it's even harder to detect that it's not my fault.
yeah, well, and I think that's super important because, you know, it's not like you get punched on date one.
Yeah. You don't. In fact, it's actually really amazing in the beginning. It's like,
Yeah,
oh my God, this is the man of my dreams. Yeah.
absolutely. And a lot of times because they are master manipulators, and they know how to work that.
Yeah.
And it's not your fault. I mean, I feel like I need to say that 100,000 times.
And I think
Because
hearing from you as a man, it's just so much more validating, I'm sure, for everybody here and for women that will watch this, that no, it is not, absolutely never, ever, ever your fault. And that's
no,
that's the sentence that I heard from my counselor for the first time after 10 years of marriage and being told it's my fault. And when I heard that, no, it's not your fault, that sentence changed my life, and it got me started on that process of leaving.
yeah, so somebody else's choice is never your fault. Never
Yeah.
your fault.
Yeah.
That's just, it's so important. And yeah, the emotional and psychological stuff, it's so challenging because you're right. It starts off slow. It's this little drip and little drip and little drip, and then the gaslighting, and you start to say, okay, well, wait a minute. Maybe I was sure he said that. Maybe he didn't. Maybe he didn't do that. And then yeah, this whole doubt spiral that comes up and comes up. And again, you know, you see it even decades later, still comes up. I mean, it's a traumatic experience.
It is.
Abuse is traumatic. So understanding that it's going to do things to you, and it's going to do things to you for a very long time. So
Absolutely.
have,
And
you know, that I think that's a big thing too, is have some of that self-compassion and be okay with not being okay for a little bit.
I will. I feel like you're talking to me right now personally because that's what's coming up for me.
Yeah.
And I have been out of my abusive marriage for 10 years, uh,
Yeah.
in a long time, but I still have those moments of self-doubt. I still have those moments of trauma resurfacing. In fact, these days it's even more. Like the other day, I was doing my hair, and he used to get really mad at me for looking attractive for other men. And there was one time, and we went to a mall, and some of my hair escaped from my hijab, and then he came home and hit me really hard. And I I just suddenly had this vivid flashback of this incident. And I was like, what is going on? Like, this was 20 years ago. Like, why am I remembering this right now? And I talked to my therapist about it. And he said, Sandra, when was the last time you were isolated? You were told you cannot go out of the house or meet your friends or have any kind of autonomy. And I said, it was in my marriage. And he said, well, there you go. It makes sense because even though, yes, they're very different situations, the pandemic versus marriage, but your mind and your body is processing it the same way because it's that trauma. And something that one day actually my older daughter said to me came to mind is that you never move on from trauma, you move on with it. You learn
Yes.
how to manage it. You learn how to not let it affect your day-to-day life. You learn how to be confident and live your life and be happy. Absolutely, I'm very grateful for my life and what I have today. But that trauma will always be part of me. So being compassionate to myself, being kind to myself, instead of beating myself up, like, what is wrong with me? Why is this coming up after 20 years? When am I going to get over it? Instead of that, just giving myself a hug and saying, it's normal. This is expected. I just need to be kind to myself in this process. And there's nothing wrong with me.
Yeah. That get over it is one of the most harmful phrases you could say to people. So that's just something for
It's very
everybody, for all of
invalidating,
us
right?
to remember, that get over it is, I don't know that there's a circumstance where you should be saying that ever.
Yeah. It's
Whether
very
that's,
invalidating. It's very
yeah,
invalidating because your feelings are your feelings and they're valid. And
yeah,
yeah, you obviously choose whether to act on it or not. But the feelings themselves are valid. And that's what you need from yourself and other people is that validation.
yeah. And that's our connected men. I mean, it's a group of dudes getting together and holding space for each other
Yeah.
to share how they're feeling in the moment,
Yeah.
and not fix things and not get over things, but just to sit with them.
Sit with them. And that's what empathy is about. It's
Yeah.
about holding space and it's about just creating that safe environment for you to feel and be. Yeah.
Yeah, and I talk about that a lot in a leadership context. As a business guy, that's, I talk a lot about leadership, and that empathetic leadership piece is huge. I think maybe 20 years ago, we wanted to follow the leaders with all the answers. That's not so much the case today, because we know you don't have all the answers. If anybody tells you they got all the answers, you know pretty quickly that they're full of crap.
Yeah.
So it's just about creating that connection with your team and having some empathy.
I want to, before I open it up to audience questions in a little bit, the last piece I wanted to touch upon, you mentioned this, that, you're one of the good guys, and there are way more good guys out there. Absolutely. I'm a firm believer in that. I wouldn't be here today if I didn't have a lot of good men in my life. All my mentors have been men. Most of my friends are guys. And I am just so, so grateful to have their support and their friendship and the championship. One of the things that for me was very important, even when I started my work and I started my nonprofit, which is a mentorship program for survivors to be able to help them build better lives. I was very adamant on having men in my board, on my team,
Right.
in my operations, and because this is, again, not a women problem. This is a human problem, and we all need to be part of the solution. So I want to ask you, what are your thoughts on how all these good men, all these wonderful men can raise their voices and challenge the locker room talk that breeds this kind of unhealthy behavior, when they see a dude friend of theirs controlling or stalking his girlfriend, like I want to know where she is all the time. When you see subtle behaviors that are indicators of violence, whether it's emotional violence, psychological violence, or physical violence, or things that could lead up to that later on, how can men in every day, be part of that solution? And, whether without writing a book, without
Yes.
starting, a run or a charity drive or all of that, what are things that men can do in their everyday lives to make a difference?
So a couple of things to that. First, a very brief thought for women that can help with this is look for and recognize the good guys, have some patience with them, and help them out. Because part of the problem, as you're pointing out, is a lot of times the good guys don't know what to do. They're not sure. So we need help. Absolutely, we need help. And I remember when I first started going down this road and I reached out for help on social media, I got beat up a lot. But yeah, as far as, so what can guys do in an everyday? One of my favorite things when it comes to inappropriate comments, inappropriate locker room talk, inappropriate jokes is just pause, look them in the eye and say, I don't get it. And just wait. Because as soon as somebody has to explain their sexist joke to you or their inappropriate comment, it makes it really awkward for them. And I think they might, the next time, think twice about having that conversation. As far as calling out friends on controlling behavior, that kind of thing, again, it's just about having that conversation and maybe being intentional about it. Picking the right time and place. Again, maybe it is being intentional about, hey, dude, you got time for a coffee next week? You got time for a beer next week? Let's get together and have a conversation. And again, depends on where you are in their life, how you sit, is having those intentional conversations. Like, hey, dude, I noticed X, Y, or Z. Is everything okay with you? Like, that just doesn't seem quite normal to me. And again, you can make it about them. Are you okay? Is something bothering you? Is there something you need so that you're not doing these ridiculously stupid things that we all know is wrong? I mean, you don't have to say that, but you just say, what do you need as a friend? How can I support you? Because it seems to me like you're maybe making some poor choices. Is there something I can do? So again, I think and we talked about this earlier, you asked if I get a lot of pushback, and I don't get a ton of pushback because I usually try and come at it from a compassionate, empathetic place and not a
how dare
finger
you
wagging,
yeah
finger pointing thing. Because that, I mean, let's face it, as much as we might want to do that, as much as that might be warranted, and I say this often, sometimes you can choose between being right and being effective. And for me, I would take being effective all day long over being right. So just having that compassionate conversation, and if it's a friend and they don't want to have that conversation or they get defensive about that conversation, well, maybe you need to choose your friends better.
Yeah.
The other thing is join in conversations like this, have discussion. One of the things I love about writing when I spend time writing, it's not so much about capturing what you're thinking, it's about discovering what you're thinking. So sometimes it's even having conversations like this. New ideas will pop up, new thoughts will come up. So if you want to be an ally, look for those opportunities to have the conversation. Look for, articles like mine, share those on social media. Make it known that this is where you stand. Have the courage to say, this is where I stand. Oh, and I've got an opportunity for all the dudes out there. I'm just putting it together now. I am hoping to get a whole bunch of video clips of dudes just saying, I stand with the many men that will condemn violence against women and misogyny of any type. Take your phone out, record that, and email it to me. I'm going to put together a montage. I've got, I don't know.
I love it.
Yeah, I've got maybe.
I'm going to tell all my guy friends to do it.
I've got maybe 10 of them, 10 or 12 of them put together. I would love to get 100 of those little clips, and
Can
like
you
literally
say
nothing
that
fancy.
again? I just want to type that so that everybody has it on. Yeah, go ahead.
Again, just something. I stand with the many men that condemn violence against women and misogyny of any type. That's it.
And misogyny.
Just state it publicly.
Amazing. I love it. I absolutely love it.
Because as you said, not everybody's going to start a charity run. Not everybody's going to start a nonprofit. Not everybody's going to champion the cause all day, every day. And that's okay. We don't need you to.
Yeah.
All
and it is simple things like these, just saying your intention and putting it out there.
Yes.
Sometimes men share my LinkedIn posts or my social media posts, and that in itself is like, yes, I stand with this woman fighting for this. Like this, just putting that out in your network, which makes other men sit up and notice that, yeah, you know what, maybe he's onto something. And you're not going to reach everybody. There will always be the naysayers and haters, and you can always try to sort of push them a little bit, but then at some point you got to realize sometimes, some people are just lost causes, and you have to kind of draw that boundary. And that happens with men and women. A lot of women are flag bearers of misogyny and patriarchy. Yeah. The backlash that I get oftentimes is from women. So right. I can sort of try to reason with them a little bit, but at some point I need to know that this is not okay for my own emotional and mental well-being. So it's kind of like a sunk cost or so, but yes. You have to at some point, you just have to be vocal, and you never know who you can reach. And I'll give a quick example of that. 3 years ago, I published an article with Toronto Life magazine, and that article went viral internationally as well. A man from Pakistan wrote to me, and he said, I have a 17-year-old daughter. Her wedding is fixed for next month. I just read your story, and I've decided to cancel her wedding and send her to university. It was as simple as somebody in his circle who shared an article on their social media, and he happened to read it. Yeah. So there are so many people out there that just need that little spark, that little sort of something that makes them think that maybe there's a different way, maybe there's a better way. And by being vocal, by doing something, by as simple as sharing an article or just saying something as intentional as what Mike just said, I stand with the many men that condemn violence against women and misogyny of any type. That is a declaration out there which inspires others to do the same. So we can all do that in our everyday lives. That is just so powerful. Thank you so much, Mike.
Yeah. So send those videos, Mike at mikecameron.ca.
I am going to be on the phone for the next few days asking all of the men in my life to do this.
That was, you asked me what I was working on today. That was one of the things I was working on today. I was starting to compile some of those.
Incredible. Okay, great. That was amazing. I'm already on a high from this session, and I can't wait to get into some of the questions that people have been typing. So Trent actually typed, Mike, wondering if you could comment on the importance of consent and relationship education within the K-12 school system. As we know, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. And before I turn it over to you, absolutely, I'm with you, Trent, on this, because I often talk about how it is so important to start at a young age with this education, because if all we are doing is damage control afterwards, then we're not bringing those numbers down. So yes, Mike, over to you.
Yeah, no, I mean, I can't overstate that enough. That's, like I said earlier, I mean, it's about getting to the root cause. We can go fix the justice system all we want. We can fund all the women's shelters we want, which, again, don't get me wrong, provide a very valuable service. But for me, I would rather get to a point where we don't need women's shelters. And it starts at our youth, because again, all of these things are ingrained in us at a very, very, very young age. And depending on your upbringing, depending on what your parents are like and what they demonstrate, there's a lot of poor role models for healthy relationships out there. So if we can find ways to get the good role models for healthy relationships into the school systems early, and maybe have some of these kids start to challenge and question when they see those not so good models or patterns of behavior in
Especially
relationships.
at home, if they're
So
seeing violence at home within their parents' marriage, and they are normalizing it. And that is actually a very prominent generational cycle of abuse that
yes,
happens. And that's the cycle I wanted to break with my daughters as well, because my parents' marriage was abusive. So I normalized abuse in my marriage to an extent, and that I learned better. So that's so important.
yeah, and again, it doesn't, bad relationship behavior doesn't just mean violence, as we talked about. So consent for sure is a big one.
Yeah. And
We have
control.
all this social media, all these, like I just recently got TikTok, and I don't know if you ever flipped on TikTok, but some of the stuff on there is pretty like, whoa. So I actually just asked my 17-year-old daughter yesterday, are you on TikTok? Because if you're, I'm a little concerned. Maybe we should have a
Yeah.
conversation.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Like some of the, like it's so heartbreaking how, and concerning and disturbing how things like these sexist jokes and commenting on women's bodies and they're just so normalized, and we think, oh, it's just silly, like come on, take a chill pill, like don't be so worked up about this. But these are the little things that eventually propagate those kinds of attitudes and behaviors, and they may not get to the point where somebody's hitting someone or killing someone, but the control mechanisms, the insecurities, the attitudes that just promote misogyny, they're all there, right? They're all around us. And in that school system that we're talking about, it's oftentimes people like, we need to teach girls about their rights. We need to teach girls about self-worth and self-respect and all of that. But that's just handling one side of the coin, like one side of the problem. If we're not going to teach boys as well about healthy manhood and healthy masculinity and respect and be what does healthy relationships and respect look like, and how to support women and girls, and how to not see them in a light of sexuality all the time. Like that is, if you're not addressing that, then we're not at all tackling the whole problem.
Yeah, absolutely. You're right. I mean, there's just no question that it has to be, the conversation has to be two-sided.
Yeah, absolutely. So anyone else? So as I said, if you have a question and you're okay with your voice and your name being in the recording, then please raise your hand.
Okay,
And
I'm going to take a quick bathroom break. I'm sorry.
Okay, sure. I'll edit this portion out. So in the meantime, if any of you have a question with me, for me, then absolutely you can ask. Khurram, you asked if you can ask questions on video. Unfortunately, not in this method of a webinar. I do not have the capability of turning video on for the attendees, but your audio can absolutely be there if you'd like. And so until Mike comes back, please ask me any questions if you have. I can otherwise also talk about some of the things that I am also part of is, this is something that I think I should say. Canadian Women's Foundation came out with a really powerful hand signal for women who are in abusive situations. So if you're a woman and you're, let's say, talking to a friend of yours who's and you're not able to make a call because your abuser's always with you, and you're talking to a friend of yours or somebody who you trust through Zoom and through a video call, this hand signal means, please call the police for me, or please help me. So if you see this, if somebody does this in front of you, or you can do this as well. So this is a hand signal that Canadian Women's Foundation just came out with a few weeks ago. So that's a very powerful thing. And I'll just kind of state again the importance of community support. Right now, shelters being full a lot of times, or support systems are at overcapacity. It is even more important for community members to step in and say, hey, are you okay? Check in with women around you who you think, there's something off there. Don't just brush it off like, oh, this is their family issue, I shouldn't meddle, I don't know how to ask them. I don't know how to ask this question or support them. I don't want to make matters worse, because your few words of hope, kindness, and support can give them that validation that, yes, I'm not alone and somebody cares about me and I matter. And that goes a long, long way. That is what people did for me that ultimately helped me save my life and change it. So give people that hope. Sometimes it's just a matter of simply checking in. Um, Welcome back, Mike. Eamon has asked a question. As we raise young men and educate our guy friends who maybe are stuck in these stereotypical tropes and want to come out of it, what do you suggest in aiding their journey to come out of these tropes? Mike, do you want to?
So, yeah, I mean, so again, it's about being intentional. So it depends on sort of where they're at in their journey. And I think, did you use the word journey? Yeah, you used the word journey. And I love that, because I think that's important to understand that it is a journey. And, you know, some of us start here, some of us are over here. And there's a path along the way. So recognizing where everybody is at in their journey and respecting that and acknowledging that, I think, is important. I mean, again, doesn't mean we respect and acknowledge and tolerate inappropriate behavior, but again, I'm a beer guy. I love beer. So I talk often about, you know, that beer journey. For some folks, we're still at Coors Light. For some of us, you know, I like my double IPAs. That's not for everybody. So identifying whether you're at the Coors Light stage or the double IPA, I think is important. I use, for our connected men, I use a framework that I call SOAR. And that's what probably the next book will be, something to the effect of learning to soar. And that's an acronym for slow down, open up, accept whatever's coming up, and reconnect with our emotional selves. So the biggest thing for any guy that wants to get intentional about sort of dropping some of the stereotypical bullshit that we're expected is just to slow down.
Yeah.
I'll just take a pause.
And join Mike's group and other groups like that. I think that would help a lot.
Absolutely. I mean, you know, the framework I've set up.
The first step in all of this is recognition, right?
Yes.
If you don't recognize that there's a problem that needs to be changed, then yeah, you can get tons of therapy and everything, but it's not going to stick. Like I tried to get my ex-husband into counseling and into all of this, but you know, he just wasn't even ready to even accept that there's something that needed to be changed. He thought he was perfect and what he was doing was completely legitimate. So in those cases, like, what do? Like, you can't help someone who doesn't want to be helped, right?
No, but again, that's where I think of, like, how do we attack this from sort of different angles? So, because if you know, I come in from the abuse angle and I don't think I'm an abuser, well, you've lost me already. But if I can come in from and this is where I said before, so if you've got somebody that you see is demonstrating some controlling behavior or inappropriate behaviors, rather than saying, hey, stop that behavior, that's terrible, say, hey, dude, look, what's going on in your life? I can tell you something's hurting you, something's wrong, something's up. How can I help? And finding those ways. And this is why, like I said, this framework for me works on so many different levels, even from a business standpoint, from a leadership standpoint. Imagine if we had a meeting where we just opened with a 60-second meditation. We just slowed down.
Yeah.
We opened up. We accepted other viewpoints. And at the end of the day, we reconnect with our purpose, whatever that is for that meeting in a business context. I mean, again, it's huge. So finding other angles that you can maybe come at it from, because part of it's back to that toxic masculinity thing. If I don't yet have the courage to really look in the mirror and say, maybe this is hurting me. If I don't have the cojones to do that yet, then you beat me over the head with it isn't going to help. So we have to try and find other ways in.
Yeah.
And those will usually present themselves. You just, again, what I've gotten fairly good at is being able to recognize those and find those entry points. You know, and if it's anger, if it's sadness, if it's whatever, just asking the right questions. And that's a big piece of it, is just asking questions, you know. And it's not about fixing things. Again, you know, if you've got a friend that's complaining about their partner and explaining that they've done something that you look at and say, geez, dude, that's wrong. You know, rather than going off about that's wrong, ask them the question, well, where did that come from? How did that make you feel? Why did you react like that? Do you think that was appropriate? Would you have done that? You know, if you could go back and do that over again, would you do the same thing? And just ask those questions.
Somebody just put a question on the chat box, which is just, you know, so powerful right now. Being a vocal feminist and advocate and someone who's frequently supporting women experiencing abuse, I worry that my advocacy and activism is having the opposite effect on my teen son. He often expresses ideas defending abusers or makes misogynistic jokes and says that he would probably be more of a feminist if it wasn't in his face all the time. Thoughts? And I have heard this as well from people that I've met, is feminism is a bad word. Feminism is all about disempowering men. It's about taking away, whatever manhood is, and it's, you know, it's about putting men down, and it's just creating a different power imbalance where men were more powerful, now women want to be more powerful. So they don't get, you know, the spirit of feminism is about equity and equality. But there is this negative connotation sometimes.
There is, for sure.
Right? And so
well, this comes back to my point earlier about, do you want to be right or do you want to be effective? So I've had this conversation with a young woman who's a friend of mine, who is a very, very strong feminist. And I promised her, I started writing them. I haven't published them. I promised her that I was going to write 2 articles, one titled "Why I'm Proud to be a Feminist," and another one entitled "Why I Won't Call Myself a Feminist." Because frankly, if I stand up and beat that drum as I'm a feminist, which again, I am, the segment of the market that I need to sell to, that I need to connect with, is going to shut down, is absolutely going to shut down. So, you know, I think it's a challenge, because you want to hold on to the values of what we're trying to accomplish, but doesn't mean we have to hold on to the label if the label is being misapplied. Yeah. Because I kind of think that's what you're getting at, right?
Yeah, but I mean, I know where you're coming from. I totally understand that, you know, you want to be right and not, you want to be effective and not necessarily right. I don't want to hang on and put a label on me and defend that label. I want to defend the spirit of it, and I want to stay true to the spirit of equity and human. That's why I always say women's rights are human rights. So we're talking about, I call myself a human rights advocate, because this isn't just a gender issue. But at the same time, this whole idea of, you know, creating this feeling of, like, a lot of men feeling disempowered because they're hearing so much of this in the media, and oftentimes it's not in the media, it's not effective, and it's sometimes done in a way that it's not effective. How do we, as regular everyday people, have that conversation that, you know, like I had this conversation with somebody recently. He was completely against the word feminism, and he's like, why do you call yourself a feminist? Why don't you just call yourself a humanist? And he wasn't directing this question at me. You know, he was kind of saying to women out there, or even men. Like I've got a lot of guy friends who call themselves feminists, and our prime minister calls himself a feminist. But then, you know, while you want to stay true to the spirit of it, you also want to dismantle that whole idea that being a feminist is wrong, or it's being, you know, the idea of empowering men is about empowering women is about disempowering men, because it isn't.
Right. No, absolutely. And again, I think having that conversation, allowing your son to express those feelings, and maybe that's the question. what does that make you feel? So when you see me behaving this way and espousing my feminist views very strongly, how does that make you feel? Does that make you feel like less of a man? Does that make you feel embarrassed? Why is that? Again, getting down to the root of that, and maybe not defending it, not fixing it, but just allowing him to express that, you know, it's embarrassing because all my friends are making dirty jokes and I feel a lot of shame when I join in because you're my mom and I love you, but I want to be one of the guys and I'm having a hard time with that. Like,
Yeah.
maybe that's what's coming up. I
Create a
don't know.
safe space. Yeah, create a safe space for him, and so that he can be himself with you and express his feelings, and you know that no, this isn't about, oh, you're wrong. This is about, yes, your feelings are valid. Let's help, let's work through these.
Mm-hmm.
And whether it's you know, it's just between you and him, whether it's maybe joining a group together or something. And this is a completely different topic, but something that I dealt with when my daughter was, she's now 19, and when she was 15 and 16, she was struggling with mental illness and she was struggling with trauma that came back from being exposed to domestic violence when she was a child. And there were so many times when she would have these feelings of helplessness, anger, uh, even towards me. And I couldn't understand. And I thought that maybe the advocacy work I'm doing is you know, being traumatic for her and a reminder in her face. And it it was like it, but it was not about me having to stop my work. It was about having, it was about creating that safe space for her. So we actually joined support groups together. We went through therapy together, and she went from this angry, traumatized teenager who was even at one point self-harming and thinking about ending her life, to being the happiest, most resilient young woman I know, and starting university in September. And there's one particular moment that I want to share with everyone that really brings all of this into reality. There was one time we were in therapy together, into group therapy, and she had a panic attack, and she got up, she went out and sat in the middle of the street, a very quiet street, but a street nonetheless. And she was clearly distressed. She was like, Mom, I don't want to live anymore. I don't know what I'm doing. You know, your wife life would be so much better without me. Just go away. You're not, I just don't want you here. I don't want to be here. And I could tell that she's having a really, really tough moment. And my initial instinct was to yell at her, like, this is so embarrassing, get up, like, we need to go back inside, you're sitting in the middle of the street, what is going on, we can talk about this later, etc., etc. But in that moment I was like, no, my job as a parent right now is to create that safe space for her. I don't agree with what she's saying, but that's not the point here. I don't need to be right, I need to be there for her. So I sat with her in the middle of the street. She looks at me and she's like, you're going to sit here with me in your corporate skirt and 4-inch heels. I said, yes, I will, because I love you and I'm here for you, and I just want to sit here with you and hold your hand. Can I please do that? And she said, okay, we can do that. And I sat with her, I held her hand. Within 5 minutes, she burst into tears, gave me the biggest hug, got up and said, okay, Mom, let's go back inside. And we finished the rest of the therapy session with our hands held under the table. And
I
that's
was
what,
so hoping you were going to say that.
and that's what empathy and creating a safe space is. So what, you know, you may not agree with the way your son is behaving or what he's saying, but it's coming from somewhere. He needs that validation. He needs that safe space to be able to express that this is what's happening, this is how I feel, and not be judged for it. You know, I went from being that judgmental parent because I couldn't understand, like, why is my daughter doing this? Like, I would say to her, like, you should be grateful there are kids dying of hunger in this world. I got married when I was your age. Like, you have everything you could possibly want. What is wrong with you, right? I was that parent at one point, like, except 4 or 5 years ago. And one day my daughter said to me, Mom, just because you have different problems, just because other people have different problems, doesn't mean that my problems are not valid. My feelings are not valid. And that was a big aha moment, like a wake up call for me, which is after which I put myself into therapy and just started learning about what she's going through and being that supportive parent. So it's really about creating that safe space for your son so that he can express what's coming up for him and not be judged for it, and then meet him where he is and help him work through that and get to a healthier mindset for himself and for others around him. I just wanted to share that story. um,
I love it.
so there's somebody else who asks, um, the problem is we can't talk about women leaving because there's no protection whatsoever available for them, not legally, not socially. Even their fathers and brothers are the same sort of abusers. So I'm assuming this is from a cultural context here. I guess my question is, where can we start? How can we not scare the women we're trying to help away by the idea of you're being abused, you have no choice, you have a choice to leave? And how can we talk to men who don't think they need to change because they don't think they're doing anything wrong, and they have a whole social, religious, and legal system that supports them? So we touched upon this a little bit. I'll speak from the women angle. I think, again, coming at it from a place of no judgment. So oftentimes women are judged for staying, and they're judged for going back. Like, you left, how, you're so weak, why did you go back? Or what is wrong with you? Like, he hits you, why are you staying? And that's very, again, invalidating. Same thing that I was just talking about a little while ago. You got to meet someone where they are, and you got to support them in a non-judgmental way. So, yes, this, what's happening to you is wrong, but ultimately it's your choice, and I'll support you in whatever way. That is actually going to be way more effective in helping them leave than telling them that they have no choice to leave. Because what has abuse done is it has taken their agency and choice away from them for all these years. So we need to give them that choice back. And I'll let Mike speak to the men angle of it a little bit.
Yeah, and I don't have a lot of experience with sort of the cultural side of the equation there, because that hasn't been my lived experience. But it's like any of those sort of tropes or stereotypes that have been ingrained and conditioned. Part of it is recognizing that and finding ways to point out where that's damaging and hurtful. And I know that's easier said than done. As you said, when you've got an entire family that supports the behavior, it makes it incredibly challenging.
Yeah, and I will do a future session on exactly the societal constructs that propagate abuse, especially from a cultural standpoint. And I think I know, the person who asked this question is also from the same cultural context. It is often everybody is supporting and validating that kind of behavior. And the good women stay, and the good men are the powerful ones that are the patriarchs of the family. So I will do a future session on that where we'll dig a little bit deeper into those societal constructs. And then again, there's a question that is along the same lines. How do women deal with being bullied by the families they were married in? So it's not just the husband, but also the family. So we'll get into that, and in a future session. We will deconstruct a lot of that family, the in-laws, and how all these other systems play into abuse being propagated, and what can we do to dismantle that a little bit. There's another question here. Is it normal to feel constantly burned out or unable to even take one more piece of information without breaking down mentally? Again, the importance of kindness to yourself. Mike, you touched upon this in the beginning, that you talked about trauma. You not move on from it, you move on with it. And can you maybe speak to that a little bit more?
Yeah, I think the fact that you're asking that question suggests that maybe it's time for a little self-care. And I think that's important to recognize that as much as the world needs you to champion a cause, the world first and foremost needs you to take care of you. We've all heard the analogy, don your own mask before helping somebody else. You're going to be absolutely useless to the world if you burn out and don't take care of yourself.
Yeah.
Samara and I will be here. We'll keep pushing ahead and leading the charge. Go take a break, take a breath, slow down, and know that that's okay. And we'll be here when you're ready.
Yeah.
But if you need to take a break, because sometimes we need to take a break, and that's okay.
Yeah,
That's really okay.
absolutely.
There's yeah, and that's, you know, and again, especially for guys, I think there's this immense amount of shame attached to, I can't do this, I can't handle this. Man, that's not a manly thing to say. We can handle everything. But having the courage to say, you know what, I care about this cause, I love this cause, I want to be here for this cause, but right now I just got to be here for me. That takes a lot of courage. So I hope you'll have the courage to have that conversation with yourself.
Thank you, Mike. And last question, we have, I think it's more of a comment than a question about victim blaming and how society keeps questioning why a woman who is who's being affected by domestic violence doesn't just leave. And I will say, from a survivor standpoint, leaving is not a one-time thing. Leaving is a process, and it takes a long time. A woman on average leaves and goes back 7 times before she's finally able to leave. I myself left 5 times before and went back, or I was sent back before I was finally able to leave. But each of those times brought me closer to being successful in leaving. And there are so many different complexities. Sometimes it's legal issues, sometimes it's family, sometimes it's culture, sometimes it's all of them. And there's a shame and stigma associated with it. And I've heard similar stories from across the country. You know, when I went and spoke in rural Saskatchewan to a bunch of Indigenous women, I heard the same things like, oh, well, you know, the cop, if I call 911, the cop that shows up is a friend of my husband's. And he's just going to say, well, lady, get over it. Just make him some good dinner or something. He'll be fine tomorrow. Right. Or when I go to Executive Towers of Bay Street, I hear the same thing from women there who are like executives in corporate settings, and you know, at home they're being controlled and abused in different ways, and they're like, you know, if I get divorced, what are people going to say? It's kind of a like, he has a high flying career, we have all these mutual friends, it's just going to look really bad, and I'm going to lose my life as I know it. um, and I've heard the same things from, you know, women in immigrant backgrounds, in other areas, and the shame, like, my church will abandon me, my mosque will abandon me, my family will abandon me. So this fear of abandonment and rejection from society and from culture and from people around us is a lot of times what holds women back. So leaving is a process, it's not a one-time thing. It took me years to unlearn all the things that normalized abuse for me, and I'm still on that journey. So be very, very kind to yourself, and be very, very kind to the women in your life who are on that journey. Everybody has a different journey, a different timeline. And the worst question you can ask is, why don't you leave? Because you know what? That's putting the responsibility of the abuse with the victim. And that's, again, a form of victim blaming. So, Mike, do you want to add anything to that before we wrap up?
No, I mean, I think you captured it well. I think the question was, how do we get society to change? And again, I mean, the societal change comes one individual at a time, and all you can control is you. So, you know, keep doing the right things and share that knowledge.
Yeah.
When we know better, we can do better.
Knowledge is power. Absolutely. Um, so thank you, everybody, for joining today. This was really, really thought-provoking, eye-opening, inspiring on so many levels. Mike, do you have any last thoughts to share with the people who are here and the people who will watch this later? Maybe for the women right now who are in these situations, and you know, with rising violence in during the pandemic, or people around them who want to help and they just don't know how to challenge that conversation. Just last piece of wisdom before we wrap up.
Yeah, again, I mean, I think the know you're not alone is a big piece. I mean, I think, as you well know, Samara, once you start sharing your story, all of a sudden everybody else has a story too, and it's like, wow, I didn't realize that. So just know you're not alone. There are people that care, that are working to do what we can, and it's not your fault. It's not your fault.
Your fault. Absolutely. It's never your fault. And you are strong. You are a warrior. You are worthy, you are enough, you are not alone. And there are tons of people, there are tons of resources, and a lot more good in this world than there is bad. Sometimes
Yes.
the bad is more vocal, and that's what we are working on as
Yes, exactly.
agents of good, to make sure that good is louder and love is louder and humanity is louder and unity is louder than anything at all that divides us.
And dudes, send me your little video clip.
Yes, absolutely. The dudes on here, the dudes that will watch this later, and all the dudes that I'm going to reach out to in the next and help them for the next several weeks of sending those videos. That's absolutely, please do that. Please do your part. Please spread the word. Whether you're a victim, whether you're a survivor, whether you're someone, you know, who just cares about this cause, or you know someone in your circles, I can guarantee you that even if you are not affected by it yourself, you know someone who is. You absolutely do. So please, you may not know them right now, but you may not be aware that they're affected, but they are. So sharing something on your social media, just spreading the word can go a long way. Maybe someone will see that, oh, wow, she shared this article. Maybe I can have this conversation with her. And they might feel safe to do that. And that can go a long, long way. Even in my journey, the people who extended their helping hand and said a few words of kindness to me showed me that I mattered and that I was worthy and I did deserve better. And that is the biggest gift you can give someone, is the gift of hope, the gift of love, the gift of kindness and support. Mike, lastly, I do want to ask you, there were a few questions on here on how people can get touch with you. So if you can maybe share your website and a little bit more about if people want to learn more about your group, that would be great.
Yeah, you bet. So mike@mikecameron.ca is my email address, and mikecameron.ca is the website. On Facebook, Connected Men, connect apostrophe D. Connected Men is the group. We're running sessions virtually now, so geography doesn't have to be a barrier. I am working on a train the trainer type scenario, so that if, you know, again, it's all peer led. It's not therapy. I'm not a psychologist. This is just a group of dudes getting together and literally practicing feeling. And I've got a bit of a framework that's super simple. If it's something that anybody is interested in bringing to their community, I can very easily show you how to do it.
I think that's a great thing that people were asking, what can men do? Well, ask the men in your lives to start that in their own little community. Mike can give you the ropes. Sorry, Mike, I'm putting you on the spot,
Yeah,
but
no,
you know,
absolutely.
he can show you the ropes and you can start your own little circle with your own bunch of friends. Get together and you know, feel safe to feel and feel safe to have these conversations and get more emotionally connected. And
Yeah, it's amazing what happens when men come together with intention. Like it's mind blowing.
incredible. Oh, so inspiring. Thank you again, Mike, for being here, for giving us so much of your time and wisdom and inspiration. This has just been the highlight of my week. Thank you, everybody, for joining today. And I hope to see you next week. We're going to be talking about moving. And I have a very special guest, again, a male ally, a strong male ally, who has started an organization called Shelter Movers. And they provide free moving services to women that are escaping domestic violence. So we're going to be talking to him and his thoughts on a lot of this stuff, and also the services that he provides and what he's seeing out there in the front lines. So please keep spreading the word. Like we have been saying all evening, knowledge is power. And when you spread knowledge, when you spread support, whether it's through sharing an article, through picking up the phone and calling your friend, or just by sharing resources, you are making a difference. Absolutely. Whether you know of it or not, you are making a difference. By just being here today, you are making a difference. So thank you so much for your support, everyone. Thank you again, Mike. I can't thank you enough.
No, it was my pleasure. We will definitely have to do this again in some capacity for
We
sure.
absolutely will. This is not by far not the last conversation we're going to
Hopefully
have.
soon I can come see you in person.
That would be great, wouldn't it? Like, you know,
Yes.
let's get to some form of normalcy in the world. Hopefully they'll reopen domestic travel at some point soon. International, we're not so sure, but, you know, domestic, hopefully. But thank you so much again. Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful, wonderful night, and we'll see you next week.
Have a great night, guys.